Hello Rovers, this is another special edition of Sailing Wave Rover where I want to talk about safety at sea. Now this is safety at sea as it pertains to a solo sailor on a small boat. And by a small boat, I mean 26 feet or less. That's 8 meters. Just a few feet bigger, things change substantially. And if you're on a crewed boat, then a lot of this may not be as pertinent as it is for a solo sailor. So what are the risks and what can you do to mitigate them? Now there are 4 points I want to get across in this video, and I'm going to start with the least important to the most important. But bear this in mind, all of them are important and you can't go to sea unless you're proficient in all of these. So number 1, of course, is the boat. The boat itself. You have to make sure that number 1, your boat is watertight. Absolutely watertight. You have to rely that your hatches are not leaking, that your ports are not leaking, because those leaks are really indications of structural issues. And those will over time decay, and when you have a hatch or a port light stove in by the power of a wave, which is entirely possible, you're going to be in survival situations. So the best thing to do is make sure your boat is watertight before you set off. Now these are small boats, 26 feet or less. There is absolutely no reason why you can't get this right. It's not that big. Number 2 is lifelines. Now you just don't tie these lifelines off to any cleat or rail or what have you. You need dedicated U-bolts that are put through very sound structural members of your boat. When you put that U-bolt through the cabin top or the deck, first of all, you make sure that those holes are sealed correctly, and then on the underside, fabricate yourself a great big backing plate, because a U-bolt by itself, if you put a big enough load on it, is just going to break free and leave a big hole where that U-bolt was. So make yourself a big backing plate. What I did was I took just aluminum plate. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. I made it probably 3 to 4 inches long and about 2 inches wide. And then I had my U-bolt come through that, and then I backed that up with stainless steel fender washers. Everything was bedded correctly, and I'm happy to say, having crossed the Atlantic twice and made that very challenging northward passage, not one leak in any of those items. That line, the safety line, I had purchased polypropylene webbing, polyester webbing, and I had that sewn into an eye and secured on my boat, and it seemed nice and strong. I bought it from the internet. I noticed that after just getting to the Canaries, so really having just crossed the Atlantic once, that it was becoming friable, and when I put a little bit of weight on it, it broke. So I replaced that with good quality webbing that I bought from a sailmaker. That's a mistake that I made by not doing that in the first place, and I'm telling you this so that you can avoid that as well, because your life is most likely going to depend on this. Now, I can honestly say that in all my voyages across the Pacific, across the Atlantic, many ocean miles solo on small boats, that I've never really put any strain on that lifeline at all. You know, I have always maintained my handholds, I brace myself, I make myself secure at all times before I try doing anything. And you also have to maintain a very good lookout while you're working. So you have to maintain a certain amount of swivel on your head. You are looking for rogue waves, because those are the things that are going to wash you overboard. Now you are wearing a safety harness. I just happen to have my safety harness with me, and this harness, you can see it's 2-inch webbing. Purchased this from a sailmaker, just the length of it, and then Mrs. Rover sewed it up for me just into this figure of 8, and I'll just show you how easy it is to put this on. Flip it over your head, bring it together, and then close the gate off. And this short tether, which is 60 inches, and that's a comfortable length for me. It allows me to work on both sides of the boat from one jack line. Some people have mentioned they thought this was too long, but I can tell you from my experience, this is the correct length for me. And I'm up on deck a lot. So it's very, very simple. The tether I made myself. It's sewn with the same thread that you would sew a sail with. These are all very large, oversized, 3/8 inch, very, very powerful climbing grade snap shackle. And the webbing itself, I've sewn it in with reinforcement here for chafe, but frankly, no chafe has shown up on it. This harness is so easy to make, and it's so easy to put on, that I put it on whenever I go up on deck. If it's complicated and it's cumbersome, then you will find an excuse not to wear it, and that is a mistake. Number 3, when it comes to your boat, is spares, tools, cordage, and material. You have to be acquainted with everything you have on board, and I'll get to that a bit later. But you should have intimate knowledge on how all your tools work. The best thing to do, of course, is to build your own boat. The second best thing is to do a major refit on it before you head to sea. Now remember, these are 26 feet or less, so the refit is not that big. You should be able to accomplish this in fairly quick order, certainly in a year or less, and that's important preparation before you head out on the big ocean all by yourself. I have seen a lot of comments that make me worry a little bit that people are heading out on the ocean with insufficient experience and knowledge. And that was the reason I felt compelled to make this video, because I want to assure you that although I make it look relatively easy during my voyage, an awful lot of preparation went into it. Years of experience, both when I was in the Navy and also crossing the Pacific, were invaluable before I headed out on the North Atlantic. I will say this, I found the North Atlantic probably the most challenging area I have ever sailed in, for a variety of reasons, and you'll probably know those reasons have you been following the series so far. The second element that I want to talk about are collisions. Now, collisions at sea, they are very, very rare. I have not been in a condition that I would call a close collision avoidance situation. Although I have seen plenty of ships, and I even had that cruise ship come within, probably 100 or 200 yards of me. But that was in the daytime. We were in communication via EHF. The cruise ship captain told me that he intended to pass closely. I told him that I was comfortable with that, and we did, and we had a great opportunity to photograph each other. But under most conditions, you are going to be fairly safe from other vessel traffic. However, you must identify yourself when you see a vessel, especially at night. You must be professional and courteous when you do so. I'll give you an example. This is Wave Rover. I am 20 degrees on your port bow at 2.5 miles. Can you ascertain my position visually? Over. That gives the bridge watchkeeper of the ship an opportunity to very quickly look at his bow, 20 degrees off, and then with his binoculars, he'll look out to sea and see me fairly easily. The second thing I would do is I would have AIS. Now, in this past voyage, you know that I became a very quick supporter of AIS. It was new technology for me, but what a great technology. It doesn't solve all problems, but it is a great technology. I would go one step further. When I go to sea next, I would like not just an AIS receiver, which tells me the position, the speed, how close the ship will come to me, all via my VHF receiver. Invaluable knowledge. Plus, it gives me the ship's name. So if there are multiple contacts on the horizon, I can contact the very ship I need to, rather than just put a message out on VHF where nobody really knows who I'm talking to. Also, I would ensure that the next time I go to sea, I have an AIS transmitter on my vessel that will be sending the same packet of information to all the vessels within VHF range. So they'll be able to tell that I'm a sailboat under sail, and I should be able to tack on an extra piece of information saying I'm a solo sailor, which will give them the added heads up to pay attention, or more closely pay attention to my position. The other area that we need to concern ourselves about collisions deals with containers. Now, my research has shown that about 500 containers are lost overboard a year. Now, I suspect the number is much higher because this is self-reported by the industry itself, and they may or may not be reporting those numbers accurately. At the very least, there's 500 containers going missing. Now, these containers are 40 feet in length. They may or may not float. One of the misunderstandings of containers is that they will float, or they will have neutral buoyancy just below the surface. It's really not possible. They'll either float or they'll sink, nothing in between. The chances are they're going to sink because as they fall from the ship, these containers are reinforced in the four corners, but they're relatively weak in their length. And as they fall overboard, they will take a twist, and that will make the doors less likely to be secure. Well, if you do have the unfortunate incident of cracking into one of these, that will be an emergency situation. However, when you're crossing the Atlantic, you are doing so, or when I cross the Atlantic, I should say, I do so with the current and the prevailing wind. So the container is also going to have the same current and the same prevailing wind. It will be doing approximately 1 to maybe 1.5 knots in the same direction, same general direction as you. My speed on a boat like Wave Rover, or typically a 26-foot boat, is going to be between 4 and 5 knots. So your actual closing speed on that container is going to be in the 3.5 knot range. The second advantage you have in a small boat, not only the slow speed, but also the amount of mass, so your displacement. So Wave Rover displays 5,500 pounds. So that's not overly heavy. I mean, when you consider at 26 feet, 5,500, a boat typically at 32 feet is over 10,000 pounds. So double for that extra 6 feet. That's what I mean, that boats just a few feet larger are a totally different kettle of fish. But when you have 5,000 pounds at 3 knots hitting an edge, yes, it's not a good thing, but it may not be as catastrophic as a larger boat. Secondly, a boat like Wave Rover, or any small boat, is going to have pretty extreme curves over its length. Now, as you have a piece of material that is flat and you put pressure between 2 points on that material, it will deflect. But you take that same material and put a bend in it, as a hull is, you will find that that material now is going to deflect a lot more energy before it caves in. Thirdly, the World Cruising Club, and I'm going to read this, reports that over 30 years of transatlantic rallies and other events, with over 200 boats crossing the Atlantic every year in these rallies, there have been no, I repeat, no confirmed incidents of a yacht colliding with the container. So we're putting a lot of worry into something that is exceptionally rare. Now, if you do have a collision, if you're so unfortunate to have a collision, what you do next is really going to determine your success. You have to immediately assess the situation and just as quickly start doing something to stop that ingress of water. This is where that knowledge of tools and the material you have on board will really come into effect. That's why I said it's really important to know exactly what you have on board and know how to use it and know how to use those tools and have the confidence to cut and reposition and do whatever it takes to keep that boat afloat. I can't give you the answer because every situation is going to be different. Chances are the ingress of water will be above the water line and perhaps you're heeled over. You can always change tacks and get that on the high side and then execute a solution, get the boat pumped out. It's not the end of the world if you have a leak. It can be, but it all comes down to what steps you initially take. Now, the next major risk that a small boat solo sailor is going to have at sea is heavy weather. Now, I've talked about heavy weather in the past, but I don't think I was as clear as I was hoping to be. Now, what I mean by heavy weather is, and I will say this, it all changes based on the size of your boat. Being that we're talking about 26 feet or smaller, heavy weather would be in the category of 40 to 60 or greater knots. That's quite a strong wind for a little boat. Accompanying that wind are the breaking seas and the building seas, and that's what's probably going to do the most danger to your boat. The big fear is that you're going to broach when you're coming down one of these waves, or you will have a breaking sea cause a broach or a pitch pole. The idea is you have to slow your boat down. Now, you've tried all these other things. You've hove to, you've shortened sail, you have put out some warps, but still you're going too fast and you're not under control. So the next step for Wave Rover is to put out a Jordan series drogue. That's the very same as in the past when I said series drogue. I just one of the subscribers had mentioned to me I should be calling it a Jordan series drogue. Same item. Now, other subscribers have said to me, well, you know, I don't agree with that entirely. I just put a tire out the back with a rope tied off to it. That is not the same. Not the same at all. The series drogue is a dedicated piece of equipment that has chain plates that have been attached to Wave Rover, very, very stout, where just one of those chain plates would be strong enough to lift Wave Rover right out of the water. They were, I believe, 16 inches long, almost 2 inches wide, and a 1/4 inch thick. Very, very powerful pieces of steel that I had attached at the transom hull joint on the stern of the boat. Now, it's not just a matter of putting a piece of steel there. You have to put on the inside of the boat a great big backing plate so that when you bolt through, it just doesn't pull, you know, that piece of steel off the boat, but it would have to have a huge amount of force to pull that section of boat off. Secondly, this dedicated piece of equipment has 100 cones attached to the line. The cones look like this. This is one of the spare ones I had made. It's made out of Dacron, but you can make it out of ripstop nylon. That's not too critical. You want to make sure that this is a good piece of polypropylene, polyester, and you don't want this to be out in the sun and being degraded. You want to keep this piece of equipment neatly stowed but ready to be deployed. On Wave Rover, I had 100 of these cones attached to the line. The beauty of the series drogue is that these cones are always, there's a weight on the end of the line, are always digging into some part of the sea. What'll happen is wave rover will get picked up by a wave, and there was possibly a bite in the line because of the slack that's created as you get lifted up, but that whole line has these cones on it. So even when there's slack in the line, it's digging in as you come down that wave. And this is the exact opposite thing that happens with a rope with a tire on the end. As you ride up that wave, a big slack occurs in the line, and on the end of that you have a great big tire or maybe a dedicated parachute. But as you come down that wave, the shock of that digging into the water as you come down is going to be pretty much the full displacement weight of your vessel being put on that tire or parachute or on the cleats that are holding it. Either way, under those conditions, you're going to have a failure of some kind. And if you survive the first shock load, chances are your boat's not going to survive very many more. And that is the big difference between the series drogue and just putting a tire or a parachute out the back. Very different entirely. The parachute or tire will work in conditions that are less than these extreme conditions that I'm talking about. Those would be the item that you would cut free and then deploy this if you had to. But frankly, I go from, after running under bare poles, I go to towing warps, and after towing warps, if I still feel I'm not in control, that's when I deploy my Jordan series drogue. So this brings me to my last point. This is the fourth strategy, and it has to do with you. You are the most important safety asset that you have when you are at sea alone. Make no mistake, it's the number one thing, and it's broken into two parts: your physical fitness or stamina and your mental ability. And your mental fitness is probably the most important asset you are going to have. So what can you do to improve both of those before heading to sea? So we'll start with the first one, your physical fitness. And what does that mean at sea? So I do a lot of consulting for folks who are considering doing these voyages. And a lot of times they'll ask me, well, do you think I'm too old? Or what do you think about this? And I'll tell you, your age has nothing to do with it. I know a 70-year-old who regularly climbs their mast. So that shows me that they're fit enough to be at sea. But really, the test on a small boat is, can you go forward in heavy weather up to your bow, take your sail off, hank on a storm sail, and get the boat back under control again? Now, too many people I know have decided to run all their lines back to the cockpit because they say it's safe. Well, I would challenge that. I would say the chances are when something goes wrong, you're going to have to get up on deck and go up forward. And if that's your first time going up forward when the vessel is underway, because you've always controlled everything from those control lines in the cockpit, well, you're putting yourself at a severe disadvantage, because if you do that regularly, several times a day as I do on Wave Rover, you get very proficient at going forward. You know what you're doing. You know where to step. You know what to hold on to. You learn to be vigilant, looking around all the time. And that's what I mean by the physical fitness. Now, the second side to that is the physical stamina, because when you're in heavy weather, chances are you're not going to be as well rested as you should be. And that takes a big drain on you. Also, if you're not, and I'll be talking about this more in depth in a moment, but mentally, if you're not fully there, that is going to suck up a lot of your energy and give you a lot of stress in the form of worry and, maybe lack of confidence. So that physical fitness is, you must be able to get up there. So you test yourself. If you make sure you can do that and you can do it quickly under all conditions. If you can't, then start working out, improve your balance, get a coach perhaps that'll help you simulate these conditions. But as I said, probably the most important strategy you can have is your mental well-being. I call it mental fitness, but I'm not an expert, so don't hold me, don't take me to court over the semantics of what I'm saying. I think everybody understands what I'm talking about. You have to be task-oriented. You have to have a laser focus on the safety of your vessel. That's number one. You don't worry as much about yourself. You have to ensure, number one, that the boat is intact. Number two, you. So that mental ability to stay engaged, to keep your edge, how do you do that? Well, I do it by routine. I make sure that when I'm at sea, and I do it ashore as well, that I have a pretty solid routine that I can rely on day in, day out. Now that routine includes I wash myself entirely and I shave every second day. I also pick a compartment on the boat every second day. I clean it. I take a rag and water and I clean it, and I make sure I clean everything in that compartment. I see what's in that compartment. I know what's in that compartment. If something is beginning to rust, I'll spray it down. I'll make sure that everything is in working order. And just over a week or two, you'll have made your way right through the whole boat and you'll start all over again. I make sure that I'm well fed when I'm at sea. I have decent food. Now, if you watch my cooking demonstrations, you might say, I couldn't eat that. But a number of you actually understand what I'm doing. I'm eating a fairly similar meal every day because I don't waste any time worrying about what I'm going to make. I know what I have. I make a pretty similar meal every day. It's the same with clothing. I have a certain amount of clothing. I know I don't waste time deciding what am I going to wear. I also maintain that I maintain that I get the right amount of water, but probably one of the biggest things I do is I make sure I'm well rested and I get enough sleep. So for me, I sleep during the day, I stand watches at night. When I sleep during the day, I'm probably sleeping maybe 1 to 2 hours. I'll get up, I'll check a few things, I'll adjust the sails or my course as needed, I'll plot a position perhaps, then I'll go and take another siesta. So probably over a period of 24 hours, I'll have gotten about 6 hours sleep, which is pretty good when you consider that a lot of the other time, the remaining 18 hours, I may not be exerting myself fully. So I am pretty well rested, and that is really important. You want to be well rested and you want to be able to spring into action. Now, if you're well rested, you're well fed, you're clean, you have a good rigorous discipline on board, chances are you're going to have pretty high morale. Another thing I do is I visualize what I'm doing. I understand that this is a personal undertaking. I live in the moment. I actually enjoy every single minute when I'm out there. And that mindset is so important to your mental well-being. If you find that you're out there and it's a battle and you're constantly trying to put out fires or deal with issues, you're going to run yourself pretty ragged. You're going to lose your edge pretty quickly. It's not good. So you want to maintain that routine that I just talked about, and you want to, when things get really bad, you've got to maintain that routine right through it. I mean, there are conditions where, you know, it's really so bad, maybe you ought to just lay down on the sole between your bunks, which is probably the area that has the least movement, and just recharge your batteries. But 99% of the time, I'm following this routine. One other little extra on the same note is little expressions that I hear people saying, "I got this," or "everything's going to be fine," or "que sera, sera" attitude. You know, we have grown up in a system where just showing up, you get a trophy. Well, when you're at sea, it doesn't work like that at all. It is risky out there. There are significant risks out there. And if you're not prepared, don't count on rescue. You shouldn't ever do that. Your boat should be your lifeboat, and you should do everything within your power to maintain the integrity of that lifeboat. Now, any of you who have been in the military, specifically in the Navy, you will probably see a huge parallel to life at sea in the Navy and what I'm advocating on your small boat. And it's no surprise, because over the centuries, we found that this routine and discipline is what makes for high morale at sea, and high morale gives you that mental energy you need to be able to deal with situations, catastrophic situations perhaps, but situations as they come up. So I have been doing a lot of thinking since the voyage ended a few months back about my next sailing adventure. And yes, there will be a sailing adventure coming up. I'm still deciding on whether or not to build a small boat or to get one. Finances are always an issue, so I'm on the lookout, and I will have more information to share on that in a few months' time. So please stay engaged with the channel, because there is going to be a second chapter. Now, as many of you know, I have a new YouTube channel. It's a homesteading channel called Rover's Rest. And the best way you can help me is by going over to that channel. I'll put a link at the end of this video, subscribing and watching these videos. I'm trying to get the channel established, and that would be a great help to me. So until next time, my friends, fair winds.